Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our midweek Bible study. I'm going through the book of Daniel, and good to be back again. As you know, I was off for 2 weeks, and uh, just happy to be back into this. And want to start with just a little bit of a recap to bring everybody up to date of where we're at. If you can see the screen right now, you'll see that we're in Daniel chapter 3, and this whole chapter is has a lot of interesting things and a lot of puzzling things. And so, just to recap, King Nebuchadnezzar, remembering he was the one who had this dream, Daniel interpreted. God used Daniel to interpret the dream. And suddenly, here we get to the next chapter, and Nebuchadnezzar is making a big image of gold, a huge statue. We went through all of that, and this whole thing is all about his um, promotion of himself. And what we notice, or that I want to point out, is how those around him, um, I feel, led him into this. And just the terminology of his advisors, and what I think, was feeding his ego. That he made this big statue, commanded that they all worship it, had a whole instrumentation here in verse 7, had it in different languages so that no one would be um, mistakenly left out because they wouldn't be able to understand. This was a big to-do. This was a nationwide thing. And now, as we, reviewed that last time, we see some explanation. And again, how many times I've read over this and never really stopped to ponder, what was going on here. Um, but it's maybe just the study of the Hebrew and Aramaic, and study in general just makes me stop and say, well, what's the purpose? Why is these verses included? What are we supposed to take away from this? What's the purpose of this being put here? And those are all fair questions, and those are what leads us to allow God to speak to us, God to, um, you know, prompt us, and maybe if I can listen close enough, maybe some direction. And so that's where we pick up today. So we get to verse 8, and if you can picture the scene of this huge statue, everybody's bowing to it in obeisance to the king. The king's feeling pretty high and mighty. He's in control, the most powerful ruler of the world. And then verse 8 comes in. And so there are certain Chaldeans, and of course, we're reading through the JPS Hebrew publication of the um, or Jewish publication of the Hebrew Scriptures, and so we get the notations by the Hebrew sages. This is where we're starting today. So certain Chaldeans came near and brought accusation against the Jews. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't understand all of the dynamics of the culture and of the national conquest, and who was in charge, and the different ethnic groups and different nations that were kind of amalgamated into this um, culture, into this nation. But there are definitely these Chaldeans who were thought to be more of the well-educated, but yet, what are they trying to do here? They brought accusation against the Jews. Um, we live in a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise, and when there are those in power that some are in favor and supportive of Israel and Judaism, and some are less favorable. And there's a whole faction, you know, working in here that, and even in our culture today, against, where anti-Judaism and anti-Semitic um, flavors are on the rise. And so we just see this repeated today as we read about it thousands of years ago. So the Chaldeans came and brought accusations against the Jews. So the commentators say that these were people who were not happy with what the Jewish people, the Hebrews, were bringing to the culture. They may have been jealous of their high standing. Obviously, Daniel got a high position. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got high positions. Maybe there were others that got high positions, and they had resentment. Again, roots of anti-Semitism is in resentment, is in looking at the Jewish people and saying, well, why are they here? Why are they there? And even today, we have to combat that if we look and can sometimes get preconceived notions as to positions that they hold and um, positions in political positions in the economy, in industry and entertainment areas, and that we sometimes can have maybe some resentment. And we see that here being played out. And again, it's not good. It's not something that society should be having. But again, here we see that these people had resentment. They were resenting the Jews for what they were doing and the influence they were making. And it almost looks to me as I look through this that this may have been resentment that's been building. And it may have been something that the king was very impressionable, and perhaps these Chaldeans and these others encouraged him to build this golden image for the purpose of bringing the destruction or bringing down the Jewish people. Now, it doesn't say that in the text, but we do know that as we continue on, there's going to come another situation where Daniel and the story of the lion's den, this was that was a contrived episode. It is something that they brought together certain rules and regulations of worshiping the king, of speaking only to the king, of not praying to anybody but the king, and they did it for the express purpose of tricking Daniel and getting rid of Daniel. Maybe this was the same thing that the king was encouraged to build this image because if you think of it, just chapter before, the king was you know very much promoting the God of Daniel, and here now this is being created to exalt him, and God is nowhere to be found. And so that's the impression I get is they were trying to manipulate the king through the flattery, just this whole thing of, oh, king, live forever. You've made a decree that every man should, worship, and they're just pouring it on thick. And then they get to verse 12 and said, but wait a minute, there are certain Jews. You can almost hear the disdain in their voice as they were bringing these accusations. And again, what's so interesting is you don't see Daniel's name mentioned here. Where is Daniel? Daniel will come up in the lion's den story. And again, there you don't see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's name. You see only Daniel. So we are just missing so much here of where's Daniel in the midst of this? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were obviously in league with Daniel. The king knew about them, and they say here, you have appointed these men over affairs of the province of Babylon, and these men have not regarded you. They don't serve your gods. They don't worship the golden image you set up. Just interesting how they tie this around to the worship of God. Now, obviously, the king knew and made a decree that everyone had to serve Daniel's God just the chapter before. That seems to be completely gone. And so, was the king just so wishy-washy? Was he so egocentric that, they could flatter him and make him change his positions? It's hard to tell, but we're going to see through the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar goes through a lot of stuff, and he gets treated and has things come upon him like we've never seen happen to anybody else. And so we don't know his mental state. We don't know why he suddenly forgot everything from the previous chapter about Daniel's God, but he was obviously very highly influenced by those around about him. And I believe that those men set this up so that they could have retaliation against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and for whatever reason, Daniel wasn't there. But what's interesting is that the king would have should have understood that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego served the one true God. So why was this all happening? And lots of questions, lots of questions. So we get to verse 13, and the king Nebuchadnezzar had rage and fury and commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these men were brought before the king. We're going to stop right there because this is just has some incredible um, words in this chapter 13. So we're going to take a look at first what the commentators might have to say. They really don't say too much. They don't go into it very deeply, but we can in the Hebrew, excuse me, Aramaic, but through the study, it's very, very interesting. So here you see in Bible Hub, verse 13, has these two words that Nebuchadnezzar was in rage and fury. Why is it necessary to have both words? Why the great expanding of the emotion that the king was going through, rage and fury. And what we can ask ourselves, well, what's the difference? I mean, obviously there are different words. Why is it necessary to have both words here? I guess that's the important thing as we study is just asking the question is, what meaning are we supposed to get from this? What can we learn by looking at these words, rage and fury? So let's unpack them by going into Bible Hub, opening up this word 7266 as it's given this Strong's number. And we see very simple that it gives us our origin from Aramaic and it talks about being in a rage. This is a little bit of the detriment of studying Aramaic is it does not have as much biblical scholarship completed, and that means that there are not as many sources for us to go to. And so here it's a simplification. It just says a rage. So what we're going to do is look in what is called Jastro's Targumim. And the word is Resh Gimel Zion. And this is a medieval commentator, meaning is from the Middle Ages, and look, looking at all of the Aramaic documents that exist and trying to give a dictionary understanding of what these words would mean. So Jastrows goes in and says it means to be unsteady, to be restless, to be agitated. So I don't know how the English translators get the word rage, but you'll see there's quite a large entry if you go to the right side of the column here. It is to incite with anger, gives many references here as to could be excited to quarrel. It talks about a PL form, which is a very intensive form, which is what we have here, and it is to rage. But what does rage mean? I mean, we get the impression, okay, maybe his face is turning red and he's just blowing a gasket here, and he's really, really mad. Yes, that's a form of rage, but there's many different ways here that this word could be interpreted. Was he shaking? Gives the impression he was shaking and trembling, so angry that, he can't even speak the words properly, and his whole body is shaking from rage. This helps build upon that understanding. So that's the word regez. So why is regez coupled with hama, which is the word for fury? So let's unpack that word by clicking on it. Those of you who have done a little Hebrew study would see that this is somewhat of a very similar word to a Hebrew word, beginning with the chet and the mem and finishing up with the aleph. Again, it's translated rage, anger, wrath. And not a lot shown here, but let's go to the Targumim and look up the chet word here, and we see some very, very expanded understandings of this word here. At first, it makes reference to anger. You also may be familiar with a word that's in our news today, and that is the word Hamas. Hamas is a word that is formed from this, and Hamas means violence, fittingly, that the group of terrorists in the Middle East is named Hamas. I don't know if it's coincidental or not, but in that word in Hebrew means violence. And of course, we see that and just a little bit of a connection of this root of anger leading to violence. And so, what's nice about the Hebrew is you can take a look at some loan words or some references to where this comes from, and it comes from the word hamad, which means to be hot, to be have something that you desire and covet to where it's enticing these desires inside of you. So even though the English translators had this rage and fury translation, in the Hebrew and Aramaic, we see that this second word goes deeper. It goes from a motivation to be carnally excited, and we find it even uses it for the word for sexual desire, the deeper desires that cause people to do things that they may regret later on, that cause you to act in certain ways that are irrational. And here we get the word sama here, and it talks about desirability. Um, and this appetite of having something that becomes so strong in you, this heat or this anger. I find it fascinating that the Jastrows here has so many entries and there's so many words in the Hebrew and Aramaic language that talk about anger and the different forms of anger, and examining where do these passions, where do these angers, where is this hotness, this raising in temperature. We often use the term hothead, and we have a lot of euphemisms to describe nostrils flaring and steam coming out of the ears and face turning red and, steam coming off the top of the head. All of these have some roots here in the Hebrew and Aramaic language and talk about where this anger comes from and how it's displayed and how different ways of showing this emotion can come out. And I think it's relevant for us as we look at the Bible because there are many words that we come across about anger and about wrath, especially when attributed to a response from God. And so we can look at this and maybe get a better understanding that anger and wrath and these type of emotions have ways to be looked at and thought of in more of a ancient mindset rather than what we may think of in our 21st century mindset. And I think that helps me um, look at this and get a better understanding of the emotions that are going on, the feelings that are in place, and know that this can help us with our understanding of God's Word. So that's where we're going to stop today with verse 13. We're going to come back next week and find out just what happened when the king was in such a state of rage and fury and all the other descriptions that we just went through by unpacking this word and what he must have felt as he's about to give forth this command and bring out some sort of punishment and judgment upon these three Hebrew guys. So thanks again for taking the time to listen, and God bless you, and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye bye.